I gave you everything, his black wife told the Korean Mafia boss. Then she slipped off her ring. The champagne glass didn't shatter when it hit the marble. It just rolled, slow and stupid, leaving a thin gold trail across the floor while 300 people pretended not to watch. Ifyananya Chukwu stood very still in the middle of the ballroom, her hands still raised from where the glass had been. Nobody had pushed her. Nobody needed to. Baek Sungwoo's voice was doing all the work. I only ask, he said, smiling at the room the way men like him always smiled, like an apology wrapped around a blade, because I'm curious. Does the translator eat at the same table as the family now? Or is that just for tonight, for the cameras? A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. Not everyone. Enough. Ifei felt the heat climb her neck before she felt anything else. 3 years of galas, 3 years of learning which fork, which bow, which silence. And none of it had prepared her for how fast a room could turn on a single sentence. She looked for her husband. Cha Do-hyun was 15 feet away, in conversation with 2 men from the shipping ministry, and for exactly 4 seconds, she would count them later, alone, in the dark, for full seconds, he did not move. His jaw tightened. That was all. The men beside him were the reason the tightening was all he allowed himself. A signed contract, 6 months of negotiation, a fragile peace between his family's shipping lanes and a government that had never fully trusted a man with his last name. Do-hyun had built a career on knowing exactly which battles could wait 30 seconds. He didn't know, in that moment, that 30 seconds would cost him something the contract never could. Phones were already rising around the room. Not obviously, nobody in that world was ever obvious. Just angled a little wrong, held a little too still. Ifei set down the small clutch she'd been holding, and for the first time in 3 years, she spoke first, before he could. No, she said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt, steady in the specific way that meant she was holding something back with both hands. I don't eat at this table because it belongs to my husband's family. I eat there because I am his family. There's a difference between being tolerated and being chosen, Mr. Beck. I used to think I understood which one I was. The room went the particular kind of quiet that isn't silence at all, it's 300 people breathing shallow, waiting to see who bleeds first. Beck's smile didn't move, but something behind his eyes recalculated. Ifei turned, found her husband's face across the room one last time, and watched him still standing there, still 4 seconds behind, still choosing the ministry men with his stillness even if he never meant to. She didn't wait for the 5th second. She walked out through the tall glass doors and into a rain that had started sometime during the toast nobody remembered anymore, and by the time Do-hyun broke away from the conversation that had cost him everything, she was already gone. If you were standing in that ballroom, would you have laughed, stayed silent, or said something? Be honest in the comments. I want to know what you would have actually done, not what you wish you'd do. Hyundai Group didn't advertise what it really was. It didn't need to. The company ran container ships between Busan and a dozen ports most people couldn't find on a map, and on paper, that was the whole story: logistics, freight, unremarkable men in unremarkable suits moving unremarkable cargo. The unremarkable part was the lie. Everyone who mattered in Seoul knew it, and knew better than to say it out loud. When Cha Do-hyun walked into a restaurant, the manager didn't seat him. The manager personally cleared a table that had already been occupied, apologized to the previous guests with an envelope thick enough to end the conversation, and disappeared before Do-hyun had finished taking off his coat. When a police lieutenant recognized his car outside a warehouse district at 2 a.m., the lieutenant turned his own vehicle around and drove the other way without being asked. Do-hyun never explained any of it. He never needed to. Power that has to announce itself has already started dying. What almost nobody knew, what Ifei herself hadn't fully understood until the marriage was 2 years old, was that Do-hyun had inherited all of it at 26, the night his father was shot in a parking garage by men his father had trusted for 15 years. Do-hyun hadn't cried at the funeral. He'd spent it doing math: who benefited, who flinched, who avoided his eyes for 1 second too long. He built the rest of his life on that math. Trust nothing you haven't verified. Love nothing you can't protect. Never let anyone close enough to be used against you twice. Then, 4 years ago, at a language exchange dinner he'd only attended because a business partner insisted, he'd met a Nigerian graduate student who corrected his English idioms without any fear of him at all, and something in his careful architecture had quietly, permanently cracked. He married her 11 months later. He never told her why the wedding had almost no guest list, why security tripled the week before, why she wasn't allowed to know the names of half the men who worked for him. He told himself it was protection. He was about to learn, the hard way, that a woman can only be protected from the world for so long before she starts to feel like she's being protected from her own husband. Hyundai's driver found her 2 hours after she left the gala, sitting under the awning of a closed bookstore 3 blocks from the hotel, soaked through, her heels in her hand. "Mrs. Cha," he started. "Don't," she said, not unkindly. "Just, give me a minute before you call him." He gave her 4. By the time Do-hyun's car pulled up, she was already standing, and the first thing he noticed, the thing that would sit in his chest for weeks afterward, was that she didn't look like she'd been crying. She looked like she'd finished. "Get in," he said. "You'll get sick." "I know how to take a taxi, Do-hyun." "Ife." "4 seconds," she said. "I counted." "You stood there for 4 seconds while a room full of people decided what I was worth, and you were still deciding whether the ministry men mattered more. That's not what happened." "Then tell me what happened." Her voice cracked on the word tell, the first crack all night. "Because from where I was standing, my husband let a man call me hired help in front of 300 people, and didn't say a single word until I'd already left the room. He didn't have an answer built for that. He had answers built for hostile shareholders, for rival families, for police investigators, 12 years of answers for every kind of threat except this one. I didn't know what to say fast enough," he admitted finally, "and it cost him more than any negotiation ever had. I don't know how to fight that kind of fight. Beck didn't pull a gun. If he'd pulled a gun I'd have known exactly what to do. So instead you did nothing." "I was protecting the contract that keeps 400 families employed." "And who was protecting me?" He had no answer for that either, and the rain kept falling, and 3 blocks away a hotel full of people were already turning the night into a story that would reach every rival family in the city by morning. She took the taxi. Who do you think is more at fault here, the man who insulted her, or the husband who stayed silent? Tell me below, because Do-hyun is about to find out the cost of that silence was higher than he ever imagined. 2. Ife didn't go home that night, or the next 3. She stayed with her cousin Blessing, who ran a hair braiding shop in a part of the city where nobody knew the name Cha Do-hyun and nobody would have cared if they did. Blessing didn't ask many questions. She just made pepper soup that was too spicy on purpose, the way their mother used to when something needed fixing that soup couldn't actually fix, and let Ife sit at the back counter in silence until she was ready to talk. "He didn't hit you," Blessing finally said, on the 3rd night, not a question. "No." "He didn't cheat." "No." "Then what, Ife?" "Because from the outside, you married a rich man who bought you a house I couldn't afford in 10 lifetimes. And now you're sleeping on my couch." Ife wrapped both hands around a bowl she wasn't eating. "You know that feeling when you walk into a room and everyone's talking about you like you're not there? That's my whole marriage, Blessing. 3 years of being talked about. Protected from things I'm never told about. Moved around like something valuable that isn't allowed to make its own decisions." She looked up. "He didn't hit me. But he's never once let me stand next to him in a fight. Even tonight, when it was my fight, he couldn't figure out how to let me have it." Blessing didn't have anything clever to say to that. She just reached over and refilled the bowl. 2 streets over, in the back office of the shop, Ife found a flyer taped to a bulletin board, a community center looking for volunteers to teach English and translation skills to newly arrived Nigerian and Ghanaian families. The building was half condemned, the flyer badly photocopied, the phone number crossed out twice and rewritten. She called it the next morning, mostly because it gave her somewhere to be that wasn't the 15-room house with the second plate she'd stopped setting a long time ago. She didn't know that a car with tinted windows had already begun parking across the street from the shop each morning, that a quiet man named Kim Tae-ho had been given exactly one instruction by his boss. Don't let her see you, and don't let anything happen to her, and that the instruction was costing Do-hyun favors, money, and men pulled from 3 other operations he no longer had the attention to run properly. He told himself watching over her from a distance counted as respecting the space she'd asked for. He was wrong, and it would take him a long time to understand exactly how wrong. Chairman Oh Byung-chul had run the syndicate's council for 31 years, and in that time, he had learned that the fastest way to destroy a young boss wasn't to attack his territory. It was to attack his composure. You've lost the ministry deal, Oh said, not as a question, in the private room above the fish market where the old men still conducted the business that mattered. Baek Sung-woo made sure of it within a day. Photographs from the gala are already circulating with commentary. Your wife's outburst, your silence. It reads as a man who cannot control his own house. She wasn't wrong to say what she said. I didn't ask if she was wrong. Oh's tea sat untouched, the way it always did when he wanted a man to understand the temperature of the room without being told directly. I asked what you intend to do about a rival family using your marriage as a weapon against everything your father built. I intend to keep my wife safe and rebuild the deal on different terms. Weakness doesn't rebuild deals, Do-hyun. It invites the next test. And the next. Cut the distraction loose publicly, and the North will read it as strength returning. Do-hyun stood. She's not a distraction. She's whatever the men circling you decide to call her, unless you decide first. Do-hyun left without another word, which the old man would remember later as the first sign that his young successor had already begun choosing a different war than the one the council expected him to fight. If you're enjoying this one so far, hit subscribe. This story is just getting started, and where it's headed is going to surprise you. Trust me. 3 weeks passed in careful, separate silence. Ife threw herself into the community center. Patched drywall alongside contractors twice her age, learned the names of a dozen kids who wandered in from the block, argued with a supplier over the price of paint until he simply gave up and lowered it. For the first time in longer than she wanted to admit, nobody was protecting her from anything. She was just building something, badly at first, then less badly, with her own 2 hands. An 8-year-old named Chitty watched her sand down a warped shelf and asked, with the particular bluntness only children are allowed, "Were you rich before?" "I used to be a lot of things," she told him, and he laughed like it was the best answer he'd ever heard, and something loosened in her chest that had been clenched for 3 years. She didn't know, that same week, that Baek Sung-woo had begun asking quiet questions about a Nigerian community organization receiving unusual attention from a man connected to Hyundai Group. She didn't know that the envelope that arrived at the center 2 days later, no return address, her name typed clean across the front, had been sent by someone inside Baek's own circle who'd started to have doubts about what his boss was planning. Inside were 3 photographs. Her own visa renewal paperwork from 4 years ago, flagged and stamped in a way she didn't understand. A handwritten note beneath it, unsigned, "He's known about this longer than you think. Ask him why it never became a problem." Ife sat with the photographs until the light outside the center's windows went from gold to gray, reading the same 3 words over and over. Ask him why. By morning, she'd made a decision. She was done not knowing things. She called his office instead of his cell. Some stubborn part of her still needed the distance a receptionist provided, still needed to feel like she was choosing to walk back into that world rather than being pulled into it. He cleared his afternoon before she'd finished the sentence. They met on neutral ground, a private room at a restaurant neither of them had chosen before, and she set the photographs on the table without sitting down. "Tell me what this is." Do-hyun looked at the pages for a long moment before he looked at her, and that pause told her more than anything he could have said aloud. He recognized them instantly. "4 years ago," he said slowly, "there was a clerical error on your visa renewal. A processing officer flagged your file for review, which, for someone married into a family like mine, could have meant months of scrutiny, questions about the marriage, questions about you, in a system that doesn't ask those questions gently. So what did you do? I made it go away. Quietly. Before you ever knew there was anything to be worried about. Her chest went tight. You made a government file about my status disappear, and never told me. I protected you from a process that would have humiliated you and put you under a microscope for a year. You protected yourself from ever having to explain your world to a system that might have started asking questions about it, too. Her voice cracked, the first real crack in weeks. Do-hyun, that's not something you get to decide alone. That was my life. My name. My risk to carry, not yours to erase without asking. If it had gone through review, they'd have looked at everything. My finances, my family, our marriage, down to the studs. It wasn't safe for either of us. You keep saying safe like it's the only thing a marriage is supposed to be. She sat down finally, all the fight going out of her at once, replaced by something heavier. I don't want to be safe, Do-hyun. I want to be trusted. There's a difference, and I don't think you've ever learned it. He had no answer built for that either. Where are you watching this from tonight? Drop your city below, because what Ife finds out next is going to change everything you think you understand about this marriage. 4. The truth, when it finally came, didn't come from Do-hyun at all. It came from Kim Tae-ho, who had spent 3 years watching his boss make the same mistake in a dozen small ways and had finally run out of patience for watching it happen again. There's something else, Tae-ho said quietly, after Do-hyun had gone silent at the table, after Ife had stood to leave. Something he's never told you, and I think it's the reason for all of it. Not just the visa. Not just tonight at the gala. Ife stopped at the door. Say it. Tae-ho glanced at Do-hyun, who didn't stop him, which was its own kind of permission. 6 years ago, before he met you, Do-hyun was diagnosed with a hereditary blood disorder. The same one that killed his mother before he was old enough to remember her clearly. It's manageable, mostly. Treatable, if it's caught early and managed carefully. But it's also the reason he spent his entire adult life believing that loving someone means eventually leaving them with nothing but grief and a target on their back. He paused. He didn't tell you because he was terrified that if you knew, you'd spend every day of this marriage waiting for him to disappear the way his mother disappeared on his father. So instead he decided to disappear a little every day on his own terms. Behind silence, behind secrets, behind decisions he made without you so you'd never have to carry the weight of loving someone who might not stay. The room went very still. Ife turned to her husband, and for the first time in 3 years, she wasn't looking at the Mafia boss the world saw. She was looking at a 26-year-old boy who had learned, the worst way possible, that love and loss arrived in the same envelope, and had spent every year since trying to protect the people he loved by loving them from a careful, secretive distance. Is that true? She asked, and it wasn't really a question. Yes, Do-hyun said, and something in his voice broke open that she had never once heard in 3 years of marriage. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to marry a countdown. I wanted you to have a husband, not a diagnosis. You gave me neither, she said softly. You gave me a man who loved me so quietly I spent 3 years wondering if he loved me at all. I do. His voice barely held. I have from the first dinner, when you corrected my English and weren't afraid of me at all. I just never learned how to say it without also handing you something I was terrified you couldn't carry. Ife didn't answer right away. She stood there with the truth finally out in the open between them, and for once, neither of them reached to fill the silence with anything less than honesty. I need time, she said finally. Not because I don't understand why you did it. I do. But understanding isn't the same as trusting you not to do it again. She left before he could find words for that, and this time, he let her go. Not because he didn't want to follow her, but because he finally understood that following her without changing anything would only prove her right. Hyundai's collapse didn't begin with a raid. It began with a phone call Baek Sung-woo made 2 nights later, once he'd learned about the diagnosis from the same disloyal insider who'd sent Ife the photographs, a man playing both sides for his own reasons, feeding just enough truth to each party to keep the fire burning. "You have a weakness now," Beck said, when Do-hyun picked up. "A sick man is an unpredictable man. The council will want stability. I can offer them that. Starting with your northern shipping routes, which I understand you're too distracted to be running properly these days. Say what you actually want. Step aside. Quietly. Hand over the routes, and I'll make sure nobody ever mentions your condition, your wife's immigration status, or the fact that you've spent 3 weeks letting your empire drift while you chase a woman who's already halfway out the door." The line went dead before Do-hyun could answer, which told him everything he needed to know about how confident Beck was in his position. For the first time since his father's funeral, Do-hyun didn't reach for the careful, calculated version of himself. He reached for Tae-ho instead. "Get me everything we have on Beck's northern accounts. Everything. And get Detective Cooper on the phone. The one from the Financial Crimes Division who's been trying to build a case against the syndicate for 2 years without enough evidence to move." Tae-ho went still. "You're talking about handing over records that would end us both." "I'm talking about ending the parts of this life that were never worth protecting in the first place," Do-hyun said. "I built an empire out of fear because I didn't know how to build anything out of trust. It's time I learned." "Would you trust a man after finding out he'd been hiding something this big, or would you still keep your distance? Tell me honestly. I want to know what you'd actually do in Ifei's position." The exposure took 11 days to plan and less than 6 hours to execute. Do-hyun didn't go after Beck with violence, the old way, his father's way, the way Chairman Oh would have expected and quietly approved of. He went after him with a journalist named Rachel Adams, who had spent 3 years trying to get anyone inside Hyundai's world to talk on the record, and a detective named Ryan Cooper, who had spent 2 years building a case with nowhere near enough evidence, until now. Do-hyun gave them everything. Shipping manifests that didn't match customs declarations. Shell accounts routed through 4 countries. A pattern of extortion stretching back a decade, all of it traceable directly to Beck Sung-woo. None of it traceable to a single decision Do-hyun himself had made in the process of handing it over. He kept nothing for himself. No leverage, no insurance file, no quiet threat held in reserve. Just the truth, laid out clean enough that even Chairman Oh's oldest allies couldn't find a way to protect Beck without burning themselves along with him. The council convened without Do-hyun 3 days after the story broke. He wasn't invited, and for the first time in his adult life, he didn't need to be. Chairman Oh, watching 31 years of careful order collapse under the weight of one overreaching young rival, made the only move that preserved anything at all. He cut Beck loose publicly, denounced him in the same breath he used to praise restraint as the syndicate's oldest value, and let the arrests happen without a single phone call to stop them. Beck Sung-woo was taken into custody on a Tuesday morning, in front of the same hotel where he'd once smiled at a room full of people and called a woman hired help. There were no cameras angled wrong this time. Every one of them was pointed straight at him. Do-hyun testified when Detective Cooper asked him to. He didn't ask for immunity in return, though Cooper offered it twice. He simply told the truth about the parts of the business he'd inherited and never fully dismantled, and let the consequences land where they landed. He sold what remained legally his. The towers, the shipping contracts, the properties built on money he no longer wanted to trace. Most of it went into a fund the city allowed him to direct toward the neighborhoods his family's operations had quietly drained for 2 generations, the same neighborhood where a half-condemned community center was slowly, stubbornly coming back to life. He never told Ifei he was funding it. Tae-ho let it slip 6 weeks later, the way he'd let the diagnosis slip months before, because he'd decided somewhere along the way that his boss needed someone willing to stop protecting him from his own worst habit. 6. The community center reopened on a bright Saturday in early spring, 5 months after the night everything Do-hyun had built came apart in a single controlled collapse. New paint. New windows. A mural along the back wall that Chitty and 2 other kids had spent 3 weekends arguing over, bright, unafraid, exactly the kind of thing Ifei had once dreamed about before she'd let herself stop dreaming at all. Children filled the building within the hour. Laughter bounced off walls that had been silent for years. Ifei stood near the door greeting families, and it took her a long moment to notice him near the back, half hidden by a crowd of parents, watching a room full of kids paint like he had no right to be proud of it and couldn't quite stop himself anyway. He didn't approach her. He hadn't, not once, in 5 months, not since the night he'd let her walk away and understood, finally, that following her without changing anything would only prove her right. He watched the mural. He watched the kids. He watched the life she'd built exactly the way she'd once hoped it would look, and after a while, he turned toward the door like a man who'd only come to see it once and didn't plan on staying. Ifei caught up to him on the front steps. "You weren't going to say goodbye." He turned, surprised she'd noticed, let alone followed. "I didn't want to make today about me. This is yours. We built it," she said. "Even the part you never let anyone put your name on." He didn't answer that. He'd stopped needing credit months ago, and it showed in the way he stood now, lighter, like a man who'd finally set down something he'd been carrying since he was 26 years old. "How's the treatment?" she asked, quieter now. Not the question of a stranger checking in. The question of someone who'd spent 5 months quietly, carefully deciding whether she still wanted to be allowed to ask it. "Manageable," he said. "The doctors say early management means decades, not years." "I should have told you that part 6 years ago, too. You should have told me a lot of things 6 years ago." She looked out at the street, at the ordinary Saturday traffic passing an extraordinary morning without any idea what it was passing. "But you told me eventually. On your own, without me forcing it out of you a second time. That matters more than I expected it to." "Ifei. I'm not finished building," she said. "Not the center. Me. I spent 3 years being protected instead of trusted, and I'm not in a hurry to trade that for anything that looks the same with better manners." "I don't want you protected," he said, and his voice, always so certain in every other room in his life, came out unsteady in this one. "I want you standing next to me. In the fight, not behind it. I should have known that from the first night at the gala. It just took me losing almost everything to actually learn it." She reached into her pocket, the movement small and unhurried, and for a moment he thought she meant to hand him something to close a door, the way she once had with a different ring, on a different, angrier night. Instead she held out her palm, empty. "Then show me," she said. "Not today. Not with a ring, not with a grand gesture that ends the story neatly enough for other people to admire. Show me on a Tuesday, when nothing's burning down and nobody's watching. That's the only proof I'll actually believe." He almost laughed, the first real, unguarded sound she'd heard from him in 5 months. "That's a much harder ask than giving up an empire." "I know," she said. "That's the point. If you were in Ifei's place, would you have chosen to walk away for good, or given him the chance to prove it slowly, on ordinary days? Tell me your honest answer below. I read every comment, and I want to know where you land." They didn't get back together that day. There was no music swelling on the front steps of a half-painted community center, no crowd of onlookers turning to watch a happy ending assemble itself in real time. What happened instead was smaller, and in its own way, harder one. He came back the next Tuesday, and the one after that, not with flowers or apologies dressed up as gifts, but with 2 hours of quiet work sanding a warped shelf beside a woman who was in no hurry to forgive him faster than he'd earned it. Somewhere in the 4th month of ordinary Tuesdays, she stopped counting how many it had been. Somewhere in the 6th, Chitty asked Do-hyun, with the same fearless bluntness he'd once used on Ifei, whether he used to be rich, too. "I used to be a lot of things," Do-hyun told him, and Ifei, sanding the next shelf over, laughed for the first time in longer than either of them could name. A real, surprised, unguarded sound that neither the gala nor the empire nor the 6 years before it had ever once managed to earn from her. It wasn't the ending either of them had expected when she'd walked out into the rain. It was better. It was chosen, every ordinary Tuesday, all over again, and this time, there was nothing either of them was protecting the other one from.